Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. I love you all. My name is miahtheking, and an apple a day keeps the doctor away. At least it does if you throw it hard enough. So, thank you so much for clicking on my video and deciding to give me a chance. Why should you stick around? Because I'm one of the few reviewers out there, if not the only reviewer out there, who can get you your information and figure out if you want to buy this game in 10 minutes or less, and I always start the video with a funny joke or a corny one-liner. Simple, right? Also, if you're looking for something a bit more entertaining, I highly suggest going and checking out the Let's Plays with my family. We screw around on shooter games, and right now we're in the process of teaching my mother, who's over the age of 50, how to play Baldur's Gate 3. They can be found on my channel. Now then, today we're taking a look at a game just released on Steam called Orebound, an automation base building survival kind of game where you play as a dwarf trying to get some ore. Pretty self-explanatory. Developed and published by Emberforge, released in early access, and selling for $25. So, what is this game anyway? Well, it's pretty much as I described earlier. You're a dwarf, and have fun, I guess. The game gives you no real story. I mean, it kinda does. Something about having to find 3 gems from 3 ancient kings or something, I don't know. But basically, now you're a dwarf and just do whatever you want. That's pretty much it. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's go into the good and the bad, starting off first with the good. So the first good thing that I personally liked was the art design and the graphics. It's kind of quirky and colorful and full of life, vibrant flavor. I don't really know how else to describe it, but I just liked it. It had great lighting effects, good detail, great contrasting, and overall looked very pleasant. It does start to look a little bit off when you're digging in the tunnels as the lighting fades into grays or browns and all the soil looks the same, but everything else looked pretty good, so I just wanted to keep it here in the positives. The next positive point that I'd like to talk about is the gameplay and the overall concept. See, the concept is interesting, at least to me. Finally, a reason to be digging these massive tunnels and holes, and a reason to be hoarding gold and other shiny objects. I'm a dwarf! It makes so much sense here! I love being a dwarf in games, as I'm sure you can tell if you've watched my Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough with my fam. But still, I love the idea. As for the gameplay, well, the gameplay has a solid foundation. That's pretty much all I can say about it right now since it's still in early access, but I'm going to continue to try going forward for all of you guys out there. Don't say I'm not putting in the work. The game's gameplay is decent enough. You can dig through anything. You have a scanner that helps you locate resources and tethers to help guide you back to base, as well as a magical wand that will show you the location of your base or other markers that you choose to place. You can use explosives to blow up various terrain or enemies, and yes, there are enemies, and I'll get to that. You can craft a big, massive, awesome base for yourself, and with the base building being fairly standard. There's no eating or drinking required in this game, so it's not much of a survival, and there's a bunch of other stuff. There's automated machinery and assembly lines, guns and turrets that you can use and set up, potions and cooking, and just a whole bunch of stuff here, and it all pretty much works fine, except for the combat. Currently, it's a bit off, as all you need to do is swing your sword while backing up, and the enemies won't be able to hit you. It could definitely use some work, but overall, everything else was working fairly well. The gameplay needs some refinement in combat, the mining, the base building, and the inventory management, but otherwise it was good enough to be mentioned here. There's also a unique way of handling research and development of your base. You can accomplish little mini missions or quests to earn rewards, and you can use resources and rewards to unlock more research options so you can build bigger and better stuff. Also, the world looks pretty large. I'm not entirely sure how much of this world is currently accessible to me, but it looks pretty massive, and when you think about how deep you need to dig to reach the good stuff, it goes deep too, so it's a pretty large world to explore and exploit. Next up for the positives is the stability and the UI. The game was incredibly stable while I was playing it. It never broke in any way for me. Never crashed, froze, stuttered, or anything like that, though there was a shit ton of clipping and seeing through the world. The game does still have some issues here and there though. But they were more funny and they weren't harmful in any way, so it's whatever. I give them a pass for these funny little bugs. But they still need to be cleaned up. But basically, while playing, I didn't really encounter anything super frustratingly broken. The UI is nice and clean and fairly easy to navigate and view, but it's not perfect and we'll get into that later. No real complaints there except for what I'm going to mention later. I should have thought about that before I wrote that down, but it's too late. I've already started and I can't stop now. It could use a little polishing on some menus and a bit harder to understand or navigate, but still a good baseline, I think. Man, I really should have rewrote that one. Okay, so those are the only real positives I can think of at the moment, and before we go into the bad things I thought of, and if you happen to find this video entertaining or at the very least informative, please like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell. It notifies you when I put out a new video, and you never know when I might review something that's been a game you've been missing out on your whole life. Okay, so now on to the negatives. The first negative for me is a big pet peeve, the tutorial. There isn't one here. I should move on to the next negative, but this shit pisses me off. When you jump into the game, there's no dialogue, there's no text, there's no explanation. You're just dropped in a random room and sent off to figure literally everything out for yourself. Normally, for simple games, I wouldn't mind so much, as it's easy to figure that kind of stuff out. But for a game like this, with automation and massive building and different resources, functions, gameplay components, and you sit there and you don't give me a single blip of informational help, not even an icon to follow. What's the matter with you? I was so lost for the majority of my playthrough. I hate stuff like this. Your game isn't simple or straightforward enough to not need some kind of information. instruction guides. Took me forever to realize you needed to go click on this thing just to get started playing the game out of the dwarf castle you start out in. And then it took me forever to figure out how I was supposed to start even playing because everything is legit locked off until you do these other things first. Sure, eventually I was able to figure out some stuff, but it was still frustrating, and I don't like it. And even now, after doing that, I still am not entirely sure if I'm doing everything right because the game never gave me any information about it. There's also no real information or anything over anything. I mean, hovering over items is supposed to tell you what it is, what it does, or at the very least some basic idiot explanation of what you're looking at, but there's nothing here, so again, figure it all out for yourself. The next negative point that I'd like to point out is that there is currently no multiplayer, however, it is planned, so it's not that bad. Still, this is one of those games that I'd have liked to have played with my wife, but unable to do so. So on the one hand, don't come into this expecting to play with your friends. On the other hand, it is under development, and hopefully it'll come out soon. So yeah, there's that. Next up for the negatives is the sound design. Again, not that bad, as it's not all awful. There are some good moments, like the dwarf making grunts and groans depending on what's happening, the dwarves singing in the mess hall, and even the typical sound effects aren't too bad. But when it came to the orcs and goblins, it was too goofy to be taken seriously. Some of the sound effects simply aren't there in the game. Some sound bad, just like some sound good. But I think my biggest annoyance, for me personally, was the footsteps of my own character. Throughout my entire time playing, it constantly sounded like someone was approaching me from behind. And normally that wouldn't be that big of a deal. But when you're so used to hearing it this way, and then next thing you know, you're traveling in the dark tunnels underneath you, you're not going to hear the footsteps of orcs or goblins sneaking up on you, causing me quite a few jump scares. I'm not going to lie. It was maddening and scary, and I hope it gets fixed soon. And last but not least for the negatives is a bit of the gameplay. I don't like the starting out area I was placed in. Now, I don't know if the worlds are procedural or not, but the one I got sucked into sucked. Just a dip in the mountain somewhere is where I was placed, making it very hard to place anything, making it look decent, or making it look out of place and weird. And want to know what you'll spend the majority of your time doing? This! This right here is what you're going to be doing the majority of your gameplay, incessantly, until you discover explosives. It was downright maddening. The resources were super hard to find, and that little tracker barely did anything. It didn't help at all. I mentioned the combat earlier, and the day-night cycle is way too short. 1 minute it's day, and the next it's night. And I mean literally 1 minute, or at least that's how it felt. They came and went so freaking quick, I was there for 2 weeks and I didn't even realize it yet. There was also a lot of awkwardness in building and placing things, finding things, organizing things, and the list goes on. It's not awful, but it's not great either. It just needs some work. Alright, so that's all I got for both the good and the bad that I felt were worth mentioning. So is this game worth its asking price, or more importantly, is it worth your time? Well, I think if you're super into stuff like this, then yeah, you're going to get a kick out of it. It definitely scratches that itch with more than enough content to keep you playing for weeks at a time. I mean, it's not broken, and it's got tons of stuff, so to me, it's worth its asking price. But if you were looking for something with a bit more depth, or something more wacky, or fast-paced, or maybe something just to play with friends, then perhaps you should wait until they get that multiplayer worked out. Overall, I think the game is fairly harmless. I don't think it's ripping you off, and I think it's got a really solid foundation to become a super fun, crazy game someday. But it is still in early access, and it still needs a lot of work. Do I recommend? Well, as I said, if you're into these kinds of games, then yes. If you just wanted something fun to play casually or with your friends, then no. This game requires commitment and time, so keep that in mind as you move forward and decide if you're going to buy it or not. Alright, so that's all the time I got for today for this video, everybody, and I told you it'd be 10 minutes or less. I hope I was able to help you. Thanks so much for watching, with a special thanks to those of you who stuck around to the end. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you all again on my next adventure. So until then, I bid you all farewell.